I'm the founder of Paragon Tech. Some of you may know me, some of you are new friends. So for those who just met me, hello and welcome. Today we're going to be unveiling a tool that we created in partnership with Clio. This is really the result of the last 2 years of work on our end, answering this question that we got from our clients, which is when the partners would go for their year-end retreat, they would wonder, how do we set our rates appropriately across our firm? And it was all done very colloquially. There was no process. It was just more so, let's look at all the partners in the firm, all the associates, all the paralegals, and let's just pick a rate. And if we haven't increased our rates for the last couple of years, maybe we should go up a little bit. Should we go up 10%, 20, 30? It was always this ambiguous process that was always met with a lot of frustration. So we wanted to solve that. So the whole concept of Paragon Tech, I started it just over a decade ago, back in 2014. The concept has been, I want to enable law firms to use better technology, to actually embrace it across the entire firm so that they can get more done in less time. So to date, we've helped about 75 law firms across the US. This is what came out of this process of creating our rate-raising service. It's a $9,500 service, and I'm going to be showing you everything from A to Z that we do in that service today. So you guys don't have to pay $9,500. Why would I do that? Why for free? Well, what you don't know is that there's actually a checkbook under each of your desks. So if you just write one out to me, you can, eat the lunch here. So here's, in all transparency, my goal is I want to create something of value and give the value to you, so that way you're able to use it, you're able to increase the rates in your firm comfortably, confidently, and then maybe you're ready for round two, and then you're ready to implement more technology in their firm that helps you to be more efficient. And now I've earned the right to be able to come into your firm, and you'll subscribe to our paid services. One of our clients we just checked in with, who's gone through this exact same process that I'm going to go through with you, and they've increased their top line revenue by 48% in just a 90-day period after implementing all the things I'm going to show you. So this is no magic. This is just stacking value on top of each other strategically so that you can increase your rates and you implement this properly. And I'm going to teach you all the tactics behind it. So the Chicago Bar Association, they trust us. They have us on their website. I'm also the founder of a group called MPAC, which is the Managing Partner Advisors Community. It's a think tank of legal ancillary professionals. We all get together and solve problems from our respective vistas within our clients' law firms. So I started that back in 2021, and that's led to some amazing insights that I've been able to glean about the industry, and then we combine that into the stuff we do. This is my firm in downstate New York. We were able to increase their revenue by 48%. You can see the metrics. We dashboard all of our clients and we check in with them every quarter. So you can see their utilization rate. It skyrocketed. It went from 10% to 26%. This is just in 90 days working with them. Realization went from 80 to 99%. Realization is just the amount of time that they're writing off. So they were writing off less time. Their lawyers were more productive, and they were able to collect at a faster rate. I'm going to turn it over to Rob to give you a little quick bio about him and our partnership with Clio.
Sure.
Go ahead, Rob, take it away.
Thanks, Jake. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Rob Cadman. I'm an account executive here at Clio. Have been at Clio for the past 4 years. Particularly the past 2 years I've been working here in Illinois. So I'm very familiar with the legal industry here. Worked with a lot of other firms. Actually, nice enough to have my client David join us here, who joined Clio earlier this year. So if you want to hear what it's like to switch to Clio, don't ask me, ask David. He's got all the deets there. But in particular, what I've done over the past few years in Illinois has been focused on what Jay's talking about here. How can we maximize your firm's top line revenue by looking for efficiencies internally? How can we try to drive better value for your clients so that, as Jay's going to discuss, we can increase your rates without feeling like your clients are paying more for the same or something along those lines. So really excited to be a part of this partnership here today and show you guys all the great work that Jay and I are doing with his clients.
Perfect. Thanks, Rob. Thanks. Yeah, and you'll notice a lot of these themes, the central themes through this is you'll see that these are issues you most likely have faced or you've thought about at least once in the past, and that's going to be what's represented here. So like I mentioned, we're going to get into the tactics. If you're a high-level person that wants overviews, this is not the event for you. Unfortunately, you're here already, so you probably don't want to walk out, but we won't judge you if you do. We're going to get into tactics around this because it's important that you understand all the steps that are responsible for ultimately creating the results, which is going to be increased rates. We want to at least understand whether what your firm is charging is adequate and on pace with the marketplace, or if you are lagging behind. This is going to be Something, if you have whatever you have with you, phone, paper, pencil, notes, you're going to want to write this stuff down because it gets pretty complex, but I'm going to make it manageable and bite size. Okay, so this all started with our billable rate comparison tool. Very creatively named, I know. And ultimately that whole process that I talked about, those conversations I had with my clients around not understanding how to adequately set their rates, what we did is we partnered with Clio. They surveyed over 60,000 firms across the United States. They'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment. And we took all of that data, crunched it, created logic behind it, and that became our billable rate comparison tool. Don't worry, there will be there's an email that I'll send at the end of that where you guys will all get access to the tool. There'll be a link so you can use it for yourselves. Did you do that or did I do that? I did that. Okay, I was gonna say, we're working. Alrighty. Perfect. So Rob, if you want to explain, so this is fairly complex how this all works and how they collected the data, but I think it makes sense to get the context around how the data ultimately was collected so that way you can understand and it gives you confidence in using the tool.
Yeah, absolutely. So the tool that Jay here has built works alongside what is the Clio Legal Trends Report. So this is a massive survey of firms across the US, and it really draws from two major data sources. One, Clio being the largest legal tech company in the US, we actually have hundreds of thousands of users. And so we use anonymized and aggregated user data to understand what do rates look like, not just broadly across the country, but in specific parts of the country, cities and states. What are the rates that attorneys, paralegals, staff members are charging for their time? And then on top of that, we recognize we are the biggest, but we're not the only software. We're not the only way people track their time or charge their clients. So we also have surveyed thousands of legal professionals and their clients as well to understand what their rates look like. So that's how this data is gathered, and that's what informs the tool that Jay has built.
So, the way this all works is, so you have all of these rates that are aggregated across the United States, and this all is output into this massive report. They call it the Legal Trends Report, and it's just, there's a massive amount of data there for you with rate data, geographic data, and what we did is we were able to condense all of this down into just the elements that are relevant to you. So we're taking the individual practice area data, and then we combine that with geographic factors, both state and then the locale we call it, which is whether you're in suburban, metropolis, or rural areas. And we're able to then take that, condense down to this is the average rate for attorneys and paralegals within your particular area, geographic and practice. So we'll get into a live demo of that, and I'll show you exactly how it works. So that way, when you guys use it for on your own firms, it'll all make sense. So when you go to this rate tool, you're going to be met with the homepage. I know it's tiny. It gets bigger in the following slides. The main things here is that at the top, this tool is able to accommodate hourly billing firms, contingency fee billing firms, as well as flat fee firms. That's all incorporated in here. Again, it's problem and issue resolution. We actually had a client, at first this tool, when we built it out, it only accommodated hourly. We had a client say, hey, well, we bill flat fees for everything, so your tool won't actually help us. So then we went back to the drawing board, retooled, and now we are able to accommodate contingency and flat fee firms. So you see there's a toggle at the top. If you turn that toggle on, if you're contingency or flat fee based, that will give you some additional options that will allow you to get those calculations there. Also, if your firm has paralegals and you bill them their time, you're gonna want to turn that option on. If you don't have paralegals, then you would turn that option off. So those are the main menu items that you have there. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the first thing you'll do is you'll select your practice area. Nice and big, right? There's a list of about 65 practice areas. Now let's say you have multiple practice areas or multiple billing types. Let's say you primarily bill hourly and then you have some flat fee or contingency base. You would just run the tool twice for that. You go through once, you save your results, and then you go back through and then run the tool, save your results from that. Okay, so you'll select your practice area. Next slide. Then what you have your state and locale. So once you do that, you're going to be presented with this screen. Now I know it's a little bit tiny because we're jamming a lot of information on the screen here. The top, you'll see we have our aggregate attorney and our paralegal rates, 407 and 202. So what this is an aggregate across the entire firm. So we're considering all levels of experience and years of being an attorney, as well as a practice, or as well as a paralegal. So when you get that 407, there are individuals in that firm who bill higher and lower. This is the basic average, and I'll show you how to break this down for the individual billable members as well, so that you know how to appropriately set rates for those folks. And then you also have your average profit margin. 35% profit margin is considered the standard across the United States for privately owned law firms. You're going to input all of your firm's information here. Now this allows you to compare your rates against the marketplace. So for example, you'll input your own firms. We had 407, if you're following, for the attorneys, and we had 200 and something for the paralegals. So you'll input your actual rates, your average rates, and the way you would get those average rates is you just look across all the attorneys in your firm, you add all of their rates together, and you divide by the total amount, right? It's basic arithmetic. Same thing for paralegals. So we have all of our 5 paralegals over there. We add up all their rates, and you divide by the total number. So that gives you your firm-wide average. So you take those numbers, and that's what you punch into this tool. So the 300 an hour was derived from taking all the individual attorneys' billable rates, punching this in here, and your paralegals was the same way. Now you may be saying this, well, Jay, how about if we bill flat fee? So we don't know what our billable rate is. Or what if we bill contingency? We don't know what our billable rate is. Well, that's where you would calculate your effective billable rate, which I'll tell you how to do that in just a moment. But there's essentially a way that you can take the total revenue of your firm, divide it by the total number of attorneys, and it'll get you an approximation as far as how much you're effectively billing per hour if you were an hourly based firm. Because that's what all of these, the assumption here is that we need to convert it into an hourly rate. And then you'll input your firm's profit margin at the bottom. So essentially you'll just take whatever your firm's profit margin is, you'll enter it in, and then the next screen will give you some data and comparisons. So you're going to see this attorney rate breakdown. So here are the general rules around how we built this out. We look at this is all takes that default rate. So if you remember for the attorney, and we only do this for attorneys, not paralegals, because paralegals are typically in a closer range as far as years of experience. But for the attorneys, we'll take all the way from entry-level associates all the way through managing partners. Managing partner one's supposed to kind of be a joke, 0 to 100 years, right? And we take all of our attorneys, and you can individually assess their rates against the averages. Now, these are based on whatever that rate you saw. So for, in this example, the 407, and then it breaks down that 407 into the respective rates. So this is still taking into account all of the practice area and geography specifics here. And this will be the next page on that tool that you'll get. I know I'm going probably pretty quick. Is everybody good so far? Okay. So we're going to keep diving in. The wormhole gets deeper. All right, next up. Okay, so this is a really interesting and useful part of the tool. What this actually does is it takes your rates, both the paralegals and the attorneys, and it then will compare them against the market averages and tell you how far off you are, right? So we can see we're $107 off the mark for our attorneys, and we're $52 off the market for our paralegals, and our profit margin is 14% off, and you get some nice graphs over there to just show a visual representation of that. Okay, next up. All right. And then this is where we interject our own logic. So what we're able to do is we use machine learning for this part, and we take the ratio between all of your rates, what the market averages are, and what they and what they actually are, the actuals, and then we plug that in, and we're able to tell you what the causes of those potential discrepancies might be. So for example, for this particular firm, since they were both low on the attorney and the paralegal rates, as well as the profit margins, we're able to see that they are likely underpricing their services, they likely have high overhead costs, inefficient internal processes, poor financial management. Right? If you have your eyes on it, typically those numbers would not have gotten so bad. And then potential profitability issues with operational improvements that can be implemented. And then we have potential solutions. So it's a direct one-to-one comparison between the causes and solutions. We can adjust the pricing strategies, which that's what exactly I'm going to show you in just a moment. We can optimize your internal processes to reduce the costs. You can implement technology to streamline all of your workflows and the processes, the way that the work is ultimately performed within your firm. You can have better training for your paralegals, and then audit financial management. So these are all bespoke. So you'll have different things that'll pop up when you enter your information in, but this just gives you a good indication, just quick back of the napkin math based on how do your rates compare to the averages and what are likely the causes and the solutions to those items. Okay. So now that you know how to understand where your firm's rates lie in comparison to the marketplace, the next step logically is, okay, well, how do we actually increase ours? So this is where there's a lot of tactics behind this, because you have to do this strategically. You obviously can't just go and jack your rates up the next day to the market averages if you're below, right? You'll lose your clients, right? But you have to do this strategically. Or let's say you're a firm that's above the market averages, and you want to be able to justify your value. You have to be able to implement this strategy. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do next. This all comes through creating value. Now, value is this nebulous word. Everyone, especially in business, you hear this word value thrown around. Everyone says that they create value. If you ask them, hey, do your clients derive value from working with you? They'd say, absolutely, right? But it's just no one can put their hands on what value actually means. How do I actually create more value? If I want to come in today and go from charging $300 an hour to charging $407 an hour to keep up with the marketplace, how do I do that? The only way you get there is by increasing your value. So there's this, one of my favorite is this guy, Theodore Levitt. He was a Harvard professor, and he wrote an article, I think it's in the 1960s in the Harvard Business Review, and he came up with this theory. His article was called Marketing Myopia, and he came up with this theory that's still believed today, and many trust in this theory when they're setting their prices, which is that a transaction does not happen until your client believes that they are receiving more than they're giving in exchange. It can't be equal. Business doesn't happen when it's equal. It has to be more. They have to believe that for the amount of money I'm spending, I'm getting a disproportionate amount of value. So that's what we're going to talk about creating today, is that disproportionate value on the back end. Now there's tactics behind it, and it requires us to look at this through the lens of our clients. You can't just, like I told you before, you can't just have a great idea and implement that. You have to make sure it will actually have traction and move the needle with your client and have them perceive your service as being more valuable, because then that gives you the liberty to increase your rates to a level that the clients are comfortable paying because they feel that they're getting that outsized return. Okay, so then we're gonna be, you can move to the next slide. So there's this guy, has anybody heard of Alex Hormozi? Okay, you're gonna want, that's a writer down for sure. So Alex Hormozi, so when I came across this problem, I'm like, okay, we figured out how to do the rates, we built this tool, now how do I actually get my clients to a level where they can increase their rates? So this is the part that's, I spent the latter part of 2 years just building out the process behind. So I scoured the internet, and I found this guy, Alex Hormozi, who has the most succinct, crystallized version of a framework around how do we create perceptible value that I've ever seen. He calls it the value equation. And Alex, he's primarily in the business of scaling other businesses and investing in them. And I just thought it was the most tactical way to break this down into a level that a guy like me could understand and actually go about creating value. So I'll tell you about that in just a moment. But basically it comes down to 4 steps. You have to identify the dream outcome from your client's perspective, right? So what is your client ultimately hiring you for? What are they looking to get out of working with you? The next is, this is the painful part, but we have to think about all the perceived problems that exist for your clients. A lot of these are imagined, but we still have to solve for those, because if they're in your client's head, this is ultimately detracting from your value if you don't have a solution for this in the way you deliver your legal services. Next up, we put together a stack. I call it a value stack, a stack of elements that we've created in order to solve for those problems. So these could be specific methodologies, these could be service offerings, this could be the way that you deliver your services. We stack as many of them as possible. Now the key here is that we want to go for high value solutions, so things that the client would view as highly valuable, but also low cost, because you don't want to create operational drag on the law firm. You want to do something that's relatively inexpensive to implement, but has a major impact on the back end. And then last, we just wrap it all the way up, wrap it all together, and then create the rate strategy based on that. It's going to be a custom rate schedule that defines what the rates are going to be increased to and the timeline in which you're going to do so, right? Because it has to be all done strategically so that you maintain all of your client base. All right. So this is very tiny, but I'll tell you exactly what it says here. The first step is the dream outcome identification. So you have to work internally with your team, or if you're solo, with yourself, right? And you're going to think about, okay, in all of my past client engagements, what are the most valuable components that they've said to me about why they hire me, right? So you'll write all that down. And then you'll think to yourself, okay, for my future clients that I want to attract, because let's face it, the clients that you have now may not necessarily be the clients that you want in the future. So when you think about your future clients, what are the things that they would deem as valuable? And you're going to put this together into one sentence, very succinct, and this is called the dream outcome. So basically the way it goes is like this. You can see the first one, okay, I want to establish and safeguard a business with the necessary legal agreements in 60 days without encountering regulatory setbacks or hidden legal risks, right? This would be a contract, or I'm sorry, this would be a business litigation firm or a corporate law firm who's helping their clients with maybe outside general counsel work. That would be their dream outcome. Now what you'll notice here is that there's a specific time value, there's an outcome, and then there's a sacrifice component. So for example, we have the safeguarding the business, that's the outcome. When you have the time, 60 days, and again, this is just based on what your client wants. It doesn't, so one of the main things I encounter with my clients is that they're like, well, it's not possible. Don't worry about that yet, right? Oh, I'm a real estate firm. Well, the closing may be delayed or the other side may be unresponsive. Don't worry about that now. You just got to think about what your client wants, because ultimately we have to create ways to solve for that or drastically reduce the friction that they would encounter working with you, right? So there's just a couple other examples from various practice areas in here. But that dream outcome, just remember, it's the outcome in the time period and then the sacrifice. They have to be able to, you want to indicate what that sacrifice is that they would typically have to make and how you're going to take that away, or at least that's the goal. All right, next up. Okay, so here's the value equation. I'll explain and break it down into what the core components are. But essentially the dream outcome, we've just figured that part out. So we've already got that down. We're 1/4 of the way through. The next components here are the perceived likelihood of achievement. So the perceived likelihood of achievement just means this. When you're working with your clients, what ultimately gets your client to the point where they believe you can actually deliver the results? So is that accreditations? Is that years of experience? Is that things that you incorporate into your consultation in order to build credibility with your clients? You have to do something, ideally multiple things, that increases their likelihood that they'll get that dream outcome with you. Time delay is the bottom side of this equation. Now, time delay, if you think about most of the corporations that have really done well, like your Amazons of the world, they focus a lot on the bottom side of this equation, time delay and effort and sacrifice. If you think about Amazon, their primary business model is, let's do what everybody else is doing, which is just getting you stuff, right? And we'll do it in half the time. Extremely valuable business model. I think all of us can agree. It's one that we wish we would have gotten into because it's just so simple. The thing is, with these bottom side of the equation elements, they're simple to conceptualize, but difficult to implement. Because if any of you have seen the operational back end of Amazon and how they're able to get that item to you the next day or now, same day delivery, there's predictive analysis to figure out what warehouse they need to have this thing at, because they know when you're going to buy it on what day of the week, and they're going to have it ready for you so they can deliver it. So again, easy to conceptualize, but difficult to implement. But these ones on the bottom typically create the most enterprise value. Next up is effort and sacrifice. So this is just, what does your client have to do that they don't want to do? So a big thing, let's say you a client retains you and you start this intake process with your clients. You're going to be requesting documents, right? You say, hey, I need tax returns for the last 3 years. Hey, I need medical records. Hey, I need whatever it might be. Now the client has to go out and source all of those things. That's effort and sacrifice. The client doesn't want to do that, right? So when we think about that and we understand that this is the client's motives, we have to create ways to reduce the friction there, because the lower we can reduce the friction, the more valuable your service is. If you were able to ultimately say, okay, client, what I'm going to do is I'm going to deliver your dream outcome, let's say in a criminal law perspective, right? You're going to avoid jail time, or you're going to get charges dismissed, and we're going to do it immediately, and you're not going to have any disruptions to your social life, family life, XYZ. You have an infinitely valuable business model. If you were able to, as they write the check to you, have that outcome to them, you now have created infinite value. All right, so the goal is we want to approach that asymptote with the things that we do by creating perceptible value. So, and that's what this guy, Alex Ramosi, he came up with that framework, and then I modified it to fit the legal profession, because there's some things that you'll see don't quite fit, but it's a great framework. Okay, you guys ready? Strap in, because this is going to get pretty intense. Okay, but there's no other way to do this. Like, I want to give you an empirical way to set your rates, so I had to do the full due diligence on this. I wasn't going to half-ass this thing and come to you with a half-baked solution. So this thing will take you from start to finish. Okay, so we're going to get to the next step, which is how do we envision what those perceived problems are for our client? I know this is a little tiny, But essentially what the process is, and you'll have a copy of the slideshow as well, we'll send out so you'll have this available. Okay, you're going to go through every practice area. This is the best way that I've conceptualized how to do this because it's a daunting task. Because many law firms will have sub-practice areas, and they do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of estate planning, a little bit of PI, a little bit of family law. So what you have to do is you have to go through every practice area in your firm, and then I want you to think of each service as its own bespoke bucket, right? So for example, you might have family law as a practice area. Well, maybe you do divorces. Maybe you do guardian ad litem work. Maybe you do, you have all of these services, list those out. And then what I want you to do is break each service into phases. So there are typically particular phases that need to be dealt with when you open up a new matter. So you might have the discovery phase, right? You might have then, now you're performing or you're sending out interrogatories. You're formulating those interrogatories first and you're sending them to opposing counsel. Right? You're performing depositions. Write down every phase of every practice area has all the services that are contained within that practice area, and then you'll have all the phases there. Why do we do that? To make sure you account for everything. In order for this to really work and you to create tangible value, you have to solve for all of the problems that exist, not some. Right? We did this process with my company about 3 years ago when I kind of envisioned how this would work. And it created so much more enterprise value. And what I found is that the side benefit of solving for these issues is that they're actually going to give you sales arguments, because we're all salespeople, right? When the client comes to us for a consultation, we ultimately have to convince them that we're the correct firm for them and that they should pay our rates. So what you'll notice is when you have all these things solved for, you'll just be able to pull these things out of your toolbox and tell your client, oh yeah, I've heard of that. Great question. Hey, by the way, this is what we do to address that. Right? And if it's thoughtful and purposefully put together, which it will be since you're going through this strategically, it will really create a compelling value proposition that makes it very difficult for them to do anything other than retain your firm, right? Unless they really just don't want their issue solved, which, I guess there are some of those out there like that. Okay, so here's just a couple of the perceived problems. The way you'll want to think of them through is the lens of that value equation. So, Nanette, if you can go back one slide, you want to think about the problems, 2 slides, from this perspective, right? Is it something that, one more, forward, I should say. One more, yep, you got it, okay. So you want to think of it from the perspective of, okay, dream outcome, you figured out what the dream outcome is, leave that one there. All of these other things support the dream outcome. So perceived likelihood of achievement. You want to think about, okay, is there something that my client has to do or a part of my process for this particular service and phase? Is there something that we can do to increase their perceived likelihood of achievement, right? Could it be creating some type of case studies or testimonial that you already have from existing clients you've worked with that you can use in order to incorporate into your process, right? It's just one example. I'll show you how to create the solutions ultimately. Time delay, right? Go one back. Time delay. Is there something you can do in this particular phase to speed up the process or reduce the time it takes to get from start to finish for that particular phase? Right? So if it is something that's contingent upon outside parties, is there something you can do? Can you create automated follow-ups within your own system? If you're waiting for medical records from a medical facility, is there something we can do to have our receptionist or our assistant reach out to that medical facility in an automated fashion in order to get those documents, right? There's always things we can do. So we want to think about these when we're coming up with our perceived problems. And then effort and sacrifice, what can we do to minimize the effort that they have to put into this? So when you go one more slide forward. So when you're thinking about those perceived problems, you want to write them from that lens, from your client's perspective. One more. Okay, back, one more. Yep. Okay, so you look at it from like this. Okay, I don't want to invest in legal fees in the event this deal doesn't work out, right? It's a perceived problem that a client might have, right? And I think this one was in particular with it was an M&A firm. So I work with the company and already know everything there is to know, so therefore I don't need to hire an attorney, right? The seller has other offers and I really want this business, and hiring a lawyer will slow things down or decrease my chances of getting it accepted, right? Or I only need to hire a lawyer for a discrete component of a business purchase. That's the one that grinds lawyers' gears the most. It's like when they want to piecemeal your service. Oh, I don't want the whole thing, just give me, just give me that one component. Right, so you have to think of all these things, and it's all written from the perspective of things that erode those 4 components that we listed before. Okay. This is actually an example of one of my clients' problems list. This will get lengthy, and it should, because it's going to expose all of the gaps that you currently have within your firms. It's really going to be quite powerful when you have this document together. So as one of the, by the way, one of the follow-ups from this, I'm going to send you, I created a template where you can input all this stuff there and categorize it so you'll have the same spreadsheet. So again, you can see the practice areas listed on the left. If it were larger, you would see the practice areas listed on the left, sub-practice area, right? The service and the phase, just like I talked about before. And then in that right column, that's where you just list down all of the perceived problems that exist based on those 4 components and things that ultimately erode value, right? Next up. Now here's where we get into solutions. So this is always the part where my clients perk up. This is the fun part because they spend this time just slogging through the marshes, and it's really, it creates a lot of mental anguish because you're just exposing all of these things in your firm and you're like, oh, geez, yeah, I guess we do have to think about that. Oh, I have run into that before. What do you do for that? Well, we usually just bubble gum and duct tape. You deal with it on an ad hoc basis versus solving for it up front so that way you have a solution ready to go in the event you need to deploy it, right? So this is the part where they perk up because they're like, okay, we can start solving this. We can put together some solutions for it. Next slide. Okay. So we're going to do this based on this thing called the delivery cube. Now, this is just my best way to kind of rationalize a complex topic and make it digestible. These are all of the methods that we have available to us in order to create value. So like ultimately, what are the things that we're going to create in order to solve for those, dream outcome, perceived effort, perceived likelihood, time delay, and perceived effort and sacrifice. These are the things. So we can do something one-on-one. So there's meaning just it's you and the client, something you do one-on-one with them. I don't like small group, but technically I've had some clients deploy some small group things, whether it be, hey, we meet with a small group within our firm typically. Right, or one-to-many. So this could be something like, hey, we're going to create a YouTube video that we can distribute out, and it's going to solve or it's going to explain XYZ component, right? DIY, and that was XYZ, not YYZ, killer, That's a close one there. Yeah. So then we get to DIY, done with you and done for you. DIY is you give your clients some type of guide in order to perform that particular part, right? Typically, what I'll tell you is that this DIY done with you and done for you, I look at it as a continuum. The more the client has to do, so more towards the DIY side of things, typically the less value they see. You could probably imagine just intuitively, if you're doing all the work, if it's a completely done for you solution, client sees that as more valuable. So what I typically recommend is I'll usually tell my clients to start with done for you items. So that way you can increase your rates and get to that point quicker. I call it monetize and then add friction later. So meaning you're going to create these solutions so they're in place so you can bill more. Yes, there's a little bit of operational drag that's created because it's a done for you. You're going to have more work internally. But then once you see what's working and if it's being received well and it's actually valuable for your client, then you start trending, okay, what components can we strip away to make this more efficient to deliver, right? You start from the other side, it's more difficult because that typically you don't have the sales arguments at the beginning when you're like, hey, I've got this great guide. It's going to show you exactly how to do this thing so that you can get these things to me quicker. It's not as powerful for clients. So that's why I usually recommend starting from the other side. Support just means, okay, what kind of access do your clients have to you? Do you have text access to you? Email, phone, Zoom, you decide what that is. Consumption method. So are you going to create a video? Is it going to be some type of video guide you're going to create or some type of audio, podcast? A written document? Is there going to be a live stream? These are just the methods that we have to deliver the value to them. And then speed and convenience. Is it going to be something that, do they have access to it right away? Is this thing available 24/7? Is it Monday through Friday, 9 to 5? That's kind of what you get there. When are you going to deliver to them? And then this last component is probably the most powerful and the one that my clients benefit from the most. So definitely this is a writer downer, the 10x to 1/10. I love this because what it basically means is that we all have our rates that we're charging currently, right? So I'm seeing a lot of nice suits around the table, so we're all charging money for our services currently. You're going to think of it from the perspective of if you charged 10 times more than you charge now and you had to create more value for your client, what would you do for them? Now, this isn't ultimately going to be something that we implement necessarily, but it gets your brain thinking creatively because you're going to stretch it that way. Think about how do we charge? If we're charging more, what would we do? right? Would you fly out to the client? What would it be? How would you deliver more value? And then you look at it from the other side. If you charge 1/10 of what you're charging now, and you still had to create more value, what would you do? So it stretches you to come, this is called divergent thinking. It stretches your brain in all different directions to figure out how you can implement things that'll create more value. So the way we typically use this is, and I'll show you in the next slide with some examples, we'll combine typically multiple of these elements together in order to create value. Go to the next slide. And this is where it kind of becomes the rubber meets the road. All right, so we have, and this is a real client, just so you know, solutions that they implemented. So this is one of my family law clients, and the service is the general intake process. So the process, of getting the notes, taking all the initial information from the client, if there's any additional individuals that are involved, third parties, things like that, right? And the perceived problem was they had this 10-minute call that they would book before their consultation. It was kind of a qualification call to see if it made sense for the firm to have deeper conversations with that client, with that potential new client. And the perceived problem was, okay, a 10-minute call will not be enough for me to clearly explain my dilemma and actually get an actionable result. Like, what are my next steps? What should they be? And that's something that they had experienced with their clients. The clients have literally told them that, like, I don't know if I want to book the 10-minute call because I can't get value from that. So we know we have to solve for it. So then what we do is we come up with a list of potential solutions. And you can see we have various ones. We have a DIY one right off the bat, which is, okay, we'll create a video and text guide to arm the client with the right questions to ask during the initial call in order to guide them towards an appropriate course of action. So we're basically saying we give that to the client before they even book the call with us, or I'm sorry, before they attend the call with us. Like, hey, here's questions that you typically should ask, and we'll make sure to answer these in our call. All right, so that's the DIY guide. The done with you version is, okay, we'll create a documented process, which is either a checklist or a general framework. So this is for the attorney to use. That includes conversation guardrails, meaning, hey, there are areas that we don't want to go into yet, right? If they're talking about specifics about their case, we just need to get the general intake information to keep this thing on the rails. So to create conversation guardrails to stop the conversation from going down paths that are unproductive and determine the next step. So this is a framework or a process we create that everyone in the firm would follow now, which has all of those major inflection points listed. And then last up, we have create a video that explains the information that is usually presented in the 10-minute call and includes commonly asked questions and answers those succinctly so the client has a sense of direction about what steps come next. So again, this is one of those things that adds friction. It's technically less valuable because the client has to do things on their own, and it takes away the firm from having to do that 10-minute call. But again, this is something we implemented down the road once they saw, here's the questions that are typically asked, and then they started doing this in addition to their typical process where they'd have this video they'd send to their clients. Okay, next up, I'm not gonna go through all the solutions here. Here's just another example here for one of my business law firms. This is a commercial litigation firm, and the service was contract drafting. And the problem was that when their clients would want revisions at a later date, they would say, well, okay, now I'm going to incur extra costs because I have to go back to my attorney to have the revisions made if the opposing party rejects a particular component of this contract, right? And it's going to cost time. Maybe I lose the deal because I have to wait for my counsel to get back to me. So what she did in this firm, they billed flat fee. They implemented a grading system. So every contract that they put out, they would actually grade all of the components that they believed were going to be likely pushed back on. And then they created alternative language up front that was compatible with the rest of the contract so that it was modular and they could swap that out. So they winded up increasing their flat fee, but they're delivering more value and they're solving a real problem that the client has in a real meaningful way. So the client now doesn't have to come back unless there's major revisions that need to be made. But they're armed initially with these components that they can just swap in and out. So then we trim and stack. Basically, we create our final value stack. So we have all of those potential solutions, and we're going to refine those down into, here's what we're actually going to implement. Well, how do you do that? First, you're going to go through each solution, and you'll assign it either high or low value. From your perspective, how do you think it's going to be received from your client? Again, we were using divergent thinking, so there are likely things in there that sound great, but in theory wouldn't work. You're just going to go through a list, high and low value. Then you'll assign a cost to it, high or low cost. Now, a lot of times cost is something that may have a direct cost, meaning you may need to purchase something in order to put that solution in place, or it may be an indirect cost where it just takes staff time to build something or a framework or a guide, things like that. So you'll assign a cost and a value. Then you're going to narrow down that list. And you'll see in that too, in the spreadsheet I sent you, it actually does it automatically, where it will only show, it's going to filter out all of the low value, low cost items. We don't want those. It's going to also filter out the high value but high cost things, and what you'll be left with is a final list that is only high value items that are low cost. And those are the ones that you're going to want to go for. Now, a lot of times my firms will feel really strongly about some of the things that they create in this process. They may have a solution that's high value and high cost, and they're like, this is just such high value that we really want to incorporate this. One or two of those is okay to have. But again, you don't want to create a ton of operational drag with your solutions. Okay, let's keep rolling. Okay, so basically this is how it all comes down into the final pricing strategy. Next up, there's a waterfall for you. All right. So market averages, and I promise I'm going to tell you how this applies to hourly, contingency, and flat. So, okay, market average. If you looked at that initial slide when we were going through the rates and we were determining what the rates bear in your market, if you're below market averages, you're going to look at all your solutions in your list. And if there are any solutions in that list that are table stakes or otherwise known as things that would naturally be offered by other law firms in the area, something that just needs to be there, if there are any table stake solutions in there, then you're going to implement those, and only once you've implemented those, you're not going to worry about the other ones, but just the ones that need to be there, you'll implement those, and then you increase your rates immediately. And I'll show you the schedule around how you do it as far as existing clients, new clients, things like that. If there are not any table stake items in there, you just increase your rates immediately, right? So if that means you have everything solved for that the base law firm needs to charge, you're just undercharging for your services, right? Next slide. Okay. So this is how it works for billable hour firms. First, you're going to look at the solution. So this particular solution was assembling a budget. This is in a family law, contested divorce context, where they would put together a budget for the client on their behalf, right? So what you'll do first, I know the text is really tiny, you'll just have to trust me, it says what it says. You're going to take the average amount of time that you bill on that particular matter. So you take a contested divorce, we bill 52 hours typically, whatever that is for your firm. Find out what that is. Then you have to calculate the value of the client's time. So if it's something you're saving time for the client on, you calculate what that time is worth. From a B2B context, business to business context, you can typically look at their hourly rate that they would charge or use some type of proxy, whether it be, you just have to figure out the value of that person's time, what their average salary might be. You have to put this together into something that makes this value component tangible. From a B2C context, meaning you're working with consumers, maybe you're a consumer bankruptcy attorney, whatever it might be, all you're going to do there is you just take their anticipated salary for that kind of individual, right? So if it's a personal injury case, I don't know, maybe what do you think average salary? Probably, aggregate. No specific individual, probably 60, 70. All right. So you're going to take that 0 to $1 million number, right? And you say, well, this is our average salary, and you mark that down. You convert that into an hourly rate, right? So I took, 150K, for example, that converts into about $72 an hour. Then what we do is we calculate the unique value generation, the UVG. And what that is just all of the things that are table stakes, those are not unique value generation. Everything else that you've created, all the solutions that are not table stakes, that all is your unique value generation. So what you'll do is you'll take your time saved. So we'll say, okay, for generating this budget, we think we can save the client 6 hours, and you multiply that by their salary, right? Their hourly rate. And that's $432. So now we've created $432 of tangible value from the client's perspective. You take that and then you calculate your individual price ceiling. Individual price ceiling means if you just implement only that solution, what is now your theoretical price ceiling of where you would price your services, your hourly rate. And the way you do that is you divide your UVG, so we just figured out in the next step that 432, and you divide it by the total number of hours that you typically bill on that kind of matter, because we want to figure out how much value we're adding to the way we do our standard services. And that comes down to $8 an hour. So now we've added an additional $8 an hour of tangible value for our client. So for a billable hour firm, you know that, okay, if we implement just the solution, we can increment our rates up $8 an hour. And you're going to go through all of your solutions, and then you'll get an aggregate total for that. All right. So once you get that aggregate total, it came out to $153 an hour for this firm. So we know our unique value that we're generating is worth $153 an hour on our rates. And again, this is an aggregate rate across the entire firm. So basically the way you calculate the price ceiling in a billable firm is you're going to take that $153 an hour and you're going to do an 80-20 split. You assign 80% of that to the attorneys, 20% to the paralegals. So the way that looks like is $122 an hour increase you can bill the attorneys at, and $31 increase you can bill the paralegals at. Again, these are the aggregate averages. Go back, you can refer back to the tool where it breaks down all the averages based on years of experience, and you can plug this into that directly to figure out exactly what to price each tier of attorney in your firm at. So you can see that takes our lawyer. We started at $350 an hour in this particular firm, and we increased to $472 an hour as our theoretical price ceiling. And then paralegals, that was $181 an hour as our price ceiling. Now the way this goes is that's your theoretical price. We've created that much tangible value. But again, if you remember back to Theodore Levitt, transaction doesn't happen until a client believes that they've received more value than they're paying. So typically my recommendation is I don't go more than 2/3 of the UVG. So if our UVG was $153 an hour of value we've created, take 2/3 of that. And that would be your theoretical limit for what I would actually bill your services at, right? Okay. So we're going to go through the same process for, you can go next slide. We're going to go same process for flat fee firms. The only difference with the flat fee firm is you don't have to convert that UVG into an hourly rate. You just leave it at the $432 and you plug that directly into your flat fee. That becomes your new price ceiling. So if you have a $15,000 service, whatever that might be, you add the $432 to it. Now it's worth $15,432, and you do the same thing. No more than 2/3 you would actually charge your rates at. You would actually set your rates at. Next slide. That just describes that process there. Next slide. All right, time flies when you're having fun, right? Okay, contingency firms. So I'm gonna run through this too. This one's a little bit more complex because we have to figure out what our percentages are and how that all relates back to the rates. So you take your solution. So for example, assemble a full timeline of damages, right? So a client may have pain and suffering. They may have loss of wages. You're gonna put together a full timeline of damages on behalf of the client. I would imagine this is something that, based on my clients, typically they would have the client kind of notate, hey, anytime you miss work or anytime you blah, 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 write a record or do blah, blah, blah. So this particular firm did that for their client, where they would have a weekly call where they'd ask the client, hey, what happened this week? And they would create this list of damages for the client. So you figure out your average settlement amount, $120,000 in this case, right? And you take the hourly value of that client's time, same thing we did before. In this case, we took a $60,000 salary. That's that, between 0 and $1 million. We use that number. $29 an hour is what that converts into. Then we calculate the unique value generation. So let's say for that timeline, we believe we saved the client 25 hours. You're going to multiply that by their rate, the rate of the value of their time, the $29 an hour, and that gives you $725. Okay, so this is where it gets complex. You have to then calculate what your percentage ceiling is for your contingency fee. So you take that $120,000, you take whatever your typical percentage is, so 33% is kind of the standard, but again, our goal is to increase that. All right, so that comes down to $39,600 is the ceiling for that. Then there's a second component to it, is then we take that $39,600, we add our unique value generation on top of that, which gives us 40 grand and some change. Then you take all of that and you divide it by the average settlement amount, because we know that settlement amount is a fixed amount, right? That's just the average across the firm, whatever you've determined it to be. And that gives you 33.6%. So this then becomes our theoretical ceiling. Only for if we implement just this solution, our theoretical ceiling is 33.6% instead of 33. So you're gonna wash and rinse and repeat and do this for all of your solutions, and you're gonna come up with next slide, you'll come up with an aggregate total, which for this particular firm, it was $17,580 is what they created in additional value for their client. Again, with this one, the only difference is we're gonna apply the ratio beforehand. So we take that 2/3 is the max I would do. And then you'll figure out exactly what, if it's 2/3, that's 0.66%. You're gonna multiply the final result against. So then you take your $39,600, it was the original amount that your firm typically recovered, what the fees would be. And then you take your $11,602, and then that gives you the $51,202. So basically, you take all of that and divide it by your initial settlement amount, and that gives you 43%. Which in this particular case, I think this client winded up going, they went a little higher than the 2/3. I think it was around 30, 38 or 39% was their contingency fee on this. Again, it just has to be a reasonable fee, but we can substantiate that because we've created individual value components for each perceived problem that the client faces. So we can substantiate the fees, and that's what winds up becoming the ceiling. Now, typically what I'll advise clients is I use 2/3 as the max. I'll typically start a little bit lower and work your way up because it's easier to charge more, but it's more difficult to back your way down because then you start losing faith with clients. Okay, last thing real quick, because I know we're over, but I'm gonna show you how to actually increase the rates and the timeline in doing so. Any questions, by the way, so far? Probably. Okay, let me finish this and then I'll jump back because I think you had a question too. Okay, next. So good so far? Okay. This is like, it's complex. This is the easiest way that I've distilled it down into. Okay. You're gonna update your pricing in lockstep with the value enhancement. So each time you implement a solution, which on average, this is taking my clients this is a lengthy process to figure out all the problems, craft the solutions of what they're going to be and actually implement those. On average, it's taking about a year to do that. Just, full transparency. We're creating perceptible value, so it's not something that happens overnight. So what I typically recommend is you increase your pricing in lockstep with each new value enhancement you add. That's why we calculate the individual unique value generated, because then you know what you can increase your rates to from that individual component. Now, some of my firms, they'll group components together and say, we're gonna do these 4 solutions, and then we'll increase our rates based on these groupings. And the way it goes is that you take all of and again, this is a huge caveat, a huge grain of salt here is that if there are existing contractual obligations about your pricing, you obviously have to, you guys are attorneys, you know more than I do, you have to make sure you stay true to those. But in general, this is how I typically advise my clients. For short-term existing clients, which is anything less than 3 months until that matter is closed, just maintain the rates. Keep your existing rates with them. If you have a long-term client, which is anything over than 3 months, and typically what we recommend is you give your clients a 30-day grace period. You let them know that the rates will be increasing. And again, this is in accordance with the value enhancement. So it doesn't go from 350 to 407, overnight. You just let them know, hey, our rates are going to be going up to XYZ, and then you apply the new rates. For new clients, you typically increase it immediately because they don't know any difference between what the old rates were and the new, right? So you can just apply the rates as you create each solution. You would apply the new rates to those clients. And that's seemed to work pretty well. Like I said, we've been doing this with our clients about a year, and I haven't had any issues related to the raising. This seems to be a very good framework in order to give clients enough room to be able to see, above around the horizon and see, okay, our rates are going up and this is what they're going up to. And then we'll go, next slide. One of the ways that you get your clients on board with their new rates is you have to create a way to communicate the new value to those clients. Now, typically what I do is I just have clients put together newsletters. A lot of times we do it for our clients where you'll say, hey, exciting new enhancements, we're doing XYZ. This will make your life easier in this way. This is something that other clients have requested and you now have access to it. Of course, you're increasing the rates, but again, you want to increase your rates and also demonstrate at the same time that the value that they're receiving is disproportionate to the rates they're increasing. And again, since we calculated what the averages were around salaries and compensation and what the solution is worth to them, we know that it should resonate well, right? Because it's all based on data. Next up. And then last thing you do, you don't want to just set it and forget it. You want to constantly check in with your clients and make sure that the value is being received in the way that you intended. So the best way to do that, which is a crazy idea, you ask your clients, hey, when we do XYZ, is this resonating pretty well? Oh yeah, I love the fact that I didn't have to put together, other firms, they usually had to put together my own list of damages, right? You guys, you did it for me. Yeah, it's awesome, amazing. Okay, thanks, great. You just ask them and you measure over time. So you want to take a look at where you're at beforehand, as far as from an efficiency standpoint, utilization, the amount of time your lawyers and paralegals are spending on billable activities. And usually you want to track that because this should go up. As you implement these solutions, your billings will increase, which will also increase your utilization as a result.
Would you recommend going back retroactively and finding your current value add and doing this, or is that, do you think, baked into your current price already?
So if it's so that gets back to the table stakes thing. If it's table stakes, so if you think other firms are doing that, or there's a similar result that they're achieving for their firms with your solution, that would not increase your unique value generation. But you absolutely should.
We're already doing that.
Yes, yeah, you absolutely should go retroactively back, analyze all the things you're doing, because there's going to be solutions in there. You're like, oh, we've had this problem. We just implemented something for this a month ago.
Yeah.
That'll be in your list. And if it's table stakes, it doesn't count towards the unique value generation. If it's something that no other firm is doing, something that you believe is fairly unique, that becomes a unique value add. So it's a way to crystallize the concept of creating value instead of having it be some intangible thing that we all espouse that we create, but have no empirical data to support that assertion. Okay, so I think probably last slide, right? I think that's the last slide. Okay, Q&A. We got there. You're up, Tom. And real quick, hey, by the way, guys, I know I'm over, so if you have to jump, I will not be offended. I know the whole table just gets up. Okay, go ahead. But yeah, if you have to go, I totally get it. But go ahead.
For my business, and I think probably for Jace as well, a lot of perceived value is results, outcomes. And I guess my question is when you're trying to figure out, especially if you have a lot of cases with, say, a company or a corporation, and they're looking at results, spend, and if you can show, because quite frankly, I've had the tables turned on me when we're going for an annual, every 3 or 5 year review. They will have stats that say this is the amount of time a file's been open, this is the spend on it, this is the result. Mm-hmm. This is what you told us the case is going to happen on an outcome, and this is what really happened. So I understand that because I've never thought about turning it on them. Say, by the way, we're up for a rate review, or we're going to increase our rates, and because a lot of this stuff is just result oriented. What did you do for me? They don't want to spend a fortune, but that can go into the modeling as to how you can improve your performance. Am I hearing that? Because
yeah, so to me, I'm hearing that's a perceived problem. The perceived problem is it took too long to get, and we had a lackluster result. So that would be your, and again, I'm not picking at you, but that would be, hey, why are we achieving lackluster results? Not saying you are. Hey, why is the case taking so long? Why is it staying open so long? Yeah. And then when you go through that divergent thinking process, you're going to think about all these solutions. Okay, how can we decrease the timeline? Are there other third parties that are involved? I know that's a big thing with a lot of our clients. Like, hey, we're waiting on opposing counsel. They haven't gotten back to us, or the guy's just a jerk, right? And he's doing this on purpose, or they just barraged us with discovery, and now it's unduly burdensome, and we're going to take them to court to try to see if we can get this minimized to something that's actually relevant to what we're dealing with, right? So that's an element as well. But you have to think about, okay, how do we conceptualize all of the potential solutions that we could in order to solve for that particular item?
Question.
Yes.
Another one, and I'll stop at this. 2 more. With respect to where you said it's where the client's based, which initially at the beginning of this, which sets one of the rate issues, right? So
the average rates,
the average
goes into the
rate.
calculation.
So you deal with the client, like say Uber, that's all over the country. What do you then have to default to where you're at? As opposed to, because it's I've got a lot of clients that are national, but again, there's a lot that are local as well. So how do you figure that in?
So that might be a Clio question. I mean, so like this all comes down to the way that the data was collected.
Yeah.
What I typically do for my clients in that perspective, if they have clients that are all over the country, I mean, if there's like a few jurisdictions that their clients are in, like, hey, they're in Florida, they're in Idaho, and they're in Illinois, right? Yeah. Run the tool for all 3 of those, right? Okay. If there's, you're dealing with a corporation like Uber, who's all over, typically in a scenario like that, we would typically run it for where the client is based, because that will have some play into it. The market that you're in dictates the rates that you charge. Yeah. Right? Like I have a client, she's hilarious, and she's always like, hey, I think I'm probably paying more for this kind of service with you guys, but like you're also in Chicago and I'm getting a lot of value. So, but I think it probably is more than, she's in Salt Lake City, Utah. Yeah. So it, geographic conditions will affect your pricing, but that That one would probably be a one-off one that we would evaluate and see what the rates actually winded up being when we're outputted with the data. And if it seems like it's heavily askew from what the market would actually bear, then we would go deeper into that and figure out, okay, how do we need to modify it? Or do we take the suburban rate versus the metropolis rate? We would probably do that analysis. But, you know, in your particular case, I mean, is that a real, are you just conceptually, like, is this something you need to solve for? Like a client with who's national
we do work
entity?
locally for them, but obviously they're national. And
Yeah.
And within the client, there's just different levels of sophistication of work, right? So what a client may be willing to pay for an antitrust case is different than if they're going to pay for, you know, a product defect and something happens.
Mhm.
So, you know, those are probably individual problems to me.
Well, yeah, and I think that's probably the data, because like,
And it depends on how that is in, you know, okay, well, if you're doing divorce work, right, or matrimonial law, but you had civil litigation, does that encompass everything?
that's a good point. Well, let me let the Clio folks address that.
Yeah, there's no perfect answer when you have
Sure.
a bunch of different practice areas and clients with a lot of variation. But I think the way I would approach that in that situation is I try to rerun the tool in a few different settings, if you will, or how you define your clients and where they work, to get a sense for what is the range, right? Like what could be the different ends that we're dealing with, and then you would also, I'm sure, you know your own rates. You might have some counterparts who you've spoken with in the past. I know a rough idea of where other firms are. If you have that to inform what Clio's tool is spitting out, then I would use your knowledge of the industry plus those sorts of ends, the range that you get from the Clio data, and work somewhere within that. So it's not perfect, but we're looking for a ballpark.
We're looking to be within the ballpark.
Exactly.
And like hitting the target, maybe not the bullseye, but at least you're on the same target.
Exactly.
I know, you've seen it that historically sometimes you have a rate and you're like, I can't believe the rate is
Yeah.
$2 off.
Yeah.
So I think that's the value.
That happened with one of my clients. They were, I want to say aggregate total, they were around, it was either 200 or 300 above the market averages. And it's funny thing about it is they knew it. They're like, yeah, we get that a lot. It's nice to see it quantified in, you know, real terms. So with that particular client, our entire engagement focused on, okay, how do we justify this value? Because I bet you're getting a ton of tire kickers, and you're also getting, if we look at your conversion ratio, it's probably really low. And it was, because, you know, firms are coming, they're like, oh, the rates are high. You know, you guys are charging, I think they were around $800 an hour, you know, for a business litigation firm. They're like, you know, for a mid-sized Chicago firm, like, this is high. So they went elsewhere. So we figured out how do we justify the value to your clients and front load that.
And the data. I mean, everyone thinks they're the smartest, more than the best in the room. And anecdotally, yeah, well, I can do this, but if you're going to pitch, here's kind of what we've done, and here's how we make it better.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's it. That's
Right, and now you have an entire battle card ready for here are the things that other firms are likely doing, and then here's the things that we do that are unique. It's like you can't replicate this. Like, this is not something, because it's all in the execution of how you put together these individual solutions. This is something that once you have in place, okay, yes, word is going to get around town like, wow, did you hear what they're doing? Like, they're doing this really unique, innovative stuff at their firm. Other firms can try to replicate, but the thing is, it's the uniqueness is in how you've started with the problem first. They're merely just copying, so they're going to get components wrong versus you thought of it from the perspective of what do my clients actually need and require from me, and we make a solution based on that. Again, the no great ideas, we're just solving for issues that clients face.
I think the data portion is like, to me, because I don't know how everyone else does it, but it's too much anecdotal. What is your buddy, or I know someone at this firm, and he's a good friend of mine, and he's getting this, and then this person's getting that, and she can charge that. It's all anecdotal. Are they being accurate? Are they kind of puffing? I mean, to me, that gives you, and then you can refine and support why you want a rate that you believe is clearly, you can say to them, I know this is.
It's
what
a
the
premium
going
rate.
is. I'm in the ballpark.
Yeah.
So, and then it's up to you to sell a reason why.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Any other questions or feedback?
I'll just breath of fresh air because I've been doing this a long time, and the The way that it's done is exactly as you described at the beginning. And that is all the partners sitting around the retreat going, 5% now, let's make it 10%.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no thought about adding value to justify the number. So this methodology.
And it shows because this year, this was the first year that legal fees across the board did not keep up with the consumer price index. Did not. It lagged behind it. Lawyers are losing faith. Like, you know, the boom of the pandemic, and there was this huge demand for legal services, and everybody, oh, let's increase our rates, let's do this, right? And then now it's kind of, we're coming into a more normal economy, and firms aren't increasing their rates like they were before. It's because they don't have the confidence to do that, is my theory. This is me putting my own perspective on this and vista on it. They don't have the confidence to do so because they're not sure that they're creating disproportionate value to the rates. So they leave the rates the same, and it lagged behind the CPI this year. Yeah.
Without spoiling too much, I was, you know, some clients were tied in contractually. And the contract, my luck, ran right before COVID, right like when COVID started to now. Well, the change has been ridiculous.
Yeah.
So we did a huge rate increase when we were up for it. And to our surprise, they accepted it immediately. So I'm thinking, I was like
Way under, yeah. Look, the thing I tell...
No idea what it was. You gotta do the LeBron move. Only something.
Well, actually, so what we're doing is we argue about that. This is a policy, and there's a reason why they do that. So
There's this old sales adage where they say if you don't get at least one audible gasp when you give your price, you're seriously undercharging. I think there's a little bit of truth to that, right? That's right. Like, oh wow, yeah, they didn't, yeah. So that's pretty, you know, that's the framework there. Hopefully it was valuable for you all. You know, if you have any questions about the framework, like I said, I'm going to send some follow-up information through email. You'll have the tool, you will have the template, so you can start organizing your own firm's data right there and figure out what that is. And then there's also an explainer in there about just how to, you know, quick 5-minute video on how to use the tool in case you forget. So yeah, I mean, that's been this is like a big cathartic, you know, release because I've been working on this for like 2 years. You guys are the first folks to, you know, to see this whole thing played out. So yeah, I want to thank Clio and you guys for, you know, being partners. You know, it really helps out to have the resources to collect this massive amount of data so I can even create a tool like this. None of us got into business because we wanted to charge adequate rates. We want to deliver immense value, but also we want to be rewarded for that. And we want to charge premium rates, right? We don't want to just keep up with the Joneses. We want to be a premier firm. So that's, you know, this whole process gets you there. Alrighty.
Thanks to Paragon and Clio.
Thank you.